Good evening, everyone. Before I get into my material this afternoon, I just want to say that as I'm preparing what I want to speak on, I don't get up here and say provocative things just for the sake of being provocative. And I don't say challenging things with the intent of challenging specific individuals. And I hope that's not the impression that you get. But I do have some criteria that I use to help guide what I say. And they're very simple. I want to believe what I'm saying. I actually want to feel strongly about it. And I want it to be something that I think needs to be said, which is a tall order for me sometimes. So with that in mind, tonight was very difficult. It's not difficult conceptually. It's not I'm over my head or out of my depth or anything. I always have a couple of ideas that I'm cooking, but they weren't ready. And I refused to rush my process. So when asked to do this, the days turned to weeks, turned to month, turned to a month and a half. And I'm standing in my kitchen one night with some hot tea and my bunny slippers, staring at my cabinets, and I ask myself, Coulter, what are we going to talk about? We're out of time, and you got to pick something. And I'm greeted with uncharacteristic silence. But it only took me a moment to realize I can do something with that. I can work with that. Because you see, in that moment, everything made sense. And I have to leave this moment, unfortunately, because if I just continued from here, it would make no sense. So we're going to come back to this moment in time. I've been wrestling with a question for several weeks at this point. And that's what I want to share with you this evening is the question, the follow-on questions, the biblical applications, what I think it means, and this lesson will be yours. So the question I've been wrestling with is, do I feel gratitude? This is the result of a really lighthearted conversation between Rachel and I that maybe I realized wasn't as lighthearted as we thought. And I put some really critical thought to it and compared myself to the Word and other things. So with that in mind, we're going to kind of look biblically at what it is, and we're not going to define the word. We're all reasonable people. The question isn't what is gratitude, it's do I feel it? And so this is not going to be comprehensive because if it were, we would be here all night. But looking at a couple of things, the Bible speaks to spiritual gratitude, a thankfulness to God for who He is, what He's done for us, the way He wants a relationship with us. And a great example of that is Psalms 118. Psalms 118. We're not going to read the whole thing. We're going to just focus on the beginning, the middle, and the end. Psalms 118. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good, for His loving kindness is everlasting. Oh, let Israel say His loving kindness is everlasting. Let the house of Aaron say His loving kindness is everlasting. Let those who fear the Lord say His loving kindness is everlasting. And verse 19, open to me the gates of righteousness, I shall enter through them. I shall give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord. The righteous will enter through it, and I shall give thanks to you, for you have answered me, and you have become my salvation. And the chapter ends just the same way it began. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good, and His loving kindness is everlasting. Also in Colossians 1, in the intro to the letter there, Paul, speaking about the spiritual attainment that the group at Colossae had attained, he chooses to close the section out by saying, give thanks to the Father who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. But the Bible also addresses a different kind of gratitude, something more pervasive, something that is ubiquitous throughout our lives. We can see this partially in 1 Thessalonians 5:18. In a section describing Christian conduct and how we should behave towards one another and outsiders. Starting in verse 15, Paul writes, see that no one repays evil for evil, but always seek after that which is good for one another and for all people. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, in everything give thanks, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. And this will be the last thing we turn to, where there's really not much turning past this. We're going to look at the Philippians 4 in verse 11. This is Paul speaking of his personal circumstances. In verse 10, I rejoice in the Lord greatly now that you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned before, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along in humble meetings, and I also know how to live in prosperity. So in light of all of this, partially and others, do I feel gratitude? I can say with confidence that yes, I am thankful to God for what he has done for me and what he has done for you. But somewhere along the way, my question also changed. What about full encompassing gratitude? Do I feel that in my life? And I'm going to be honest with everyone here this evening, I'm not sure that the answer is yes for me. And I don't say that from foolish pride or shameful embarrassment, but from a place of self-improvement. Because if I'm honest with myself, my gratitude outside of spiritual things is very limited, or it seems to be very limited and very narrow. Case in point, I am grateful that this is the last time I have to do this. It's the truth, too. It's a joke. It's the truth. If you consider the small things of your life, I don't seem to be very grateful for those. I'm not grateful that my coffee's hot in the morning. If it weren't, I would have a new machine at my house in 5 days. You can tell when I thought of that. But when I push on that and examine it, I realize that I am surrounded by expectations. Expectations I place on things and others. If you consider a lot of the interactions of your life, they boil down to do this, get that. And that's not a reward, and that's not a gift, but that is an expectation. And if I apply these things to small things in my life, do I apply these things to big things in my life? What about life, liberty, and happiness? Do I consider those to be a blessing, and am I thankful for them? Or has my culture made me believe that I should expect these things, or worse, I'm owed these things? Let's consider life for just a moment. I have a reasonable expectation that I'm going to live 80 years, give or take a little bit. But those 80 years are going to be good years. And you may have an expectation like that or a similar one, and you may not even realize it, because if you consider when life is cut short, we call it tragedy. And I am in no means and no way trying to say it's not sad when we lose someone we love. But I am asking, is maybe that sadness part of the fact that we won't get as much time with them as we expected? What about our physical possessions? Do I view my physical things as a blessing, or do I view them as representation of my own work and my own effort? Because if I get this and if I do this and I get that, I can buy those. Is that why I have so much anxiety around something happening to them? Have I done enough? Do I have enough? Have I planned for enough things to happen that everything will be okay because I've worked really hard to get this? And when I consider that mindset, maybe I'm a little closer to the rich young ruler than I care to admit. Not because I believe I'm wealthy or that I have a large quantity of things, but that is an underlying message and principle in that parable. So at this point, I am sufficiently bummed out because I'm having a hard time reconciling this logical conclusion that I've reached with who I think I actually am as a person. And so I do a reasonable thing, and I just choose not to think about it for a couple of days. We're back in our kitchen, back with my hot tea, got the bunny slippers on, and we're super comfy. I'm staring at the cabinets, and in the silence, I remember Bob Ross, the painter. You got to have opposites, light and dark and light in painting. It's like in life. You've got to have a little sadness once in a while so you know when the good times come, and I'm waiting on the good times now. This is a quote from one of his first televised appearances after his wife died from cancer. And in this moment, as I'm staring ahead into space and think about this, it all kind of clicks. And my final question for the evening is, do we recognize the good times in our lives? I think it's a valid question because if we take stock of the things that are immediate in our lives, we realize that there is a lot to be thankful for. At least I am. being extremely personal. I'm in good health. I dodged surgery earlier this year. Super happy for that. Mentally, emotionally, I'm good well-being. My job is chaotic and hectic, but there's plenty of things to do, and there's plenty of money to make it happen. And the people who are near and dear to my heart, the same thing can be said about them. I am part of a spiritual family who love me, who want me to succeed, want the best things for me, and would help me no matter what, despite my best efforts at being unapproachable sometimes. And when I consider all of these things, I have to say that life is beautiful. Not perfect. Something inevitably will happen, but it'll probably be okay. And I say all of this because as a young person, I struggled for years with the notion that I had a purpose. What is it? I had to figure it out. Was it to build something grand, noble? I spent a lot of time and energy on that. But let's consider what somebody who actually achieved grand and noble things said about that. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, starting in verse 7. Go then, eat your bread in happiness, drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. Let your clothes be white all of the time, and let not oil be lacking for your head. Enjoy life with the woman whom you fall in love with all the days of your fleeting life, which is given to you under the sun. This is your reward in life and your toil in which you have labored under the sun. Considering that, what if my grand purpose is to just be a good friend, to be a good brother, to be a servant, to be a listener, the guy who makes the joke, or just the guy who tells the truth? It's necessary to say all of these things because if we don't take stock, we can fail to recognize this, and the good times will just glide straight past us in our lives, and we'll be sitting waiting for them to arrive when they may already be here. Because let's consider the patriarch Jacob for the moment. I'll recap his life in just a few words. He got the blessing. He got the birthright. God iterates the promises to him at the vision of the ladder. Let's actually turn to that quickly. I'm sorry that it's not up here. Genesis 28. Genesis 28, starting in verse 15, this is God speaking. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So Jacob leaves this spot, gets a wife, gets the wife, has a large family, large herds, large flocks, reconciles with his brother, sets up home again, survives a devastating famine by paying cash for food, so we at least know he still had wealth in that part of his life. But let's consider Jacob the man. Do you not think that Abraham and Isaac told him stories? Did he have friends, people he cared about? Loved his sons, loved his wives? Was he in any sort of situation that we are not in today? What did he face that we wouldn't? Joy, disappointment, sadness. But let's consider it from a different perspective for just a moment. Imagine being so invested in a person that you would do anything for them to succeed because they don't even understand how imperative you are to their plan. And so you make them promises, you help them. They get into some really tricky situations, you get them out. There are roadblocks coming way ahead, you start planning right now to take care of it. And you watch it happen. They succeed, they thrive, they flourish. Everything goes according to the plan. Now imagine that person is asked about their life, and their response is, my life has been short and unpleasant. Jacob could have said any number of things. He could have said, God is good, and he has blessed me. My life has been unpleasant, but I've leaned on God, and he took care of me. But instead, he chose to say, my life is short and unpleasant. So this is a very popular image that gets passed around. People like to put their own funny, cute things on the top of it. If I'm honest with everyone this evening, this picture is actually extremely difficult for me to look at. It's difficult for me to look at because I know what this side of the bus feels like. Some of you relate. You know what that feels like too. And in all statistical likelihood, someone here among us tonight is going through it, and we would never know because you put on a happy face and you do what you can. I know. I want you to know that, and that I'm praying for you if you're going through it. And if you've never been on this side of the bus, I hope you never land on that side of the bus. But the point I want to make this evening with this image is if you want to think that it's all doom and gloom, you can. If you want to agonize over sin in the world, you can do that too. If you want to believe that Christianity is somehow under attack more now than it has ever been in the history of our religion, you have opportunities to believe that as well. But for a moment, let's consider that Christ told his disciples, they hate me, what are they going to do to you? And that this world will continue to be a sinful place until he comes back. I've just decided I can't be that worked up about it. But instead, I want to focus on my purpose and enjoy the good times in my life and persist. And it is ironic that I did this image as well, because the original text for this image was sometimes it just depends on us. Sometimes it depends on us to figure out what we're thankful for. Sometimes it depends on us to look around and say, this ain't too bad. Earlier I said I was thankful to God for the spiritual things that he has done, and it also depends on us to render obedience to it. If you haven't rendered obedience and you would like to tonight, we would love to help you. And if you've strayed from the path and you want to come home, we would love for that to happen as well. And we encourage you to do so by making your way to the front as we now stand and sing.